I'm Luca Somigli, Chair of the Department of Italian Studies and Goggio Chair in Italian Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here in person on the YouTube channel to the first in a series of three talks by Professor Margherita Ganeri, who is currently our visiting Goggio professor, and I'm very happy. Very honored to introduce Professor Ganeri. I remember reading her book on the historical novel a few years ago when it came out, and just finding it a really original and fascinating book. And so, it's great that now we can welcome her here officially in our University of Toronto community. Let me briefly introduce Professor Ganeri, who has a very long curriculum of achievements and publications, truly impressive. I'll give you the highlights. Margherita Ganeri is full professor of contemporary Italian literature at the University of Calabria, where she's also the founding director of the Seminar Italian Diaspora Studies. She's on the board of directors of the journal Moderna and directs the book series Italian Diaspora Studies for the publisher Rubbettino. She has received 2 Fulbright fellowships and has been appointed visiting professor at numerous universities, including Cambridge University, Stony Brook University, my alma mater, I might add, the Italian School at Middlebury College, the University of Chicago, the Karl Ruprecht University of Heidelberg, Seton Hall University, the University of Saskatchewan, and Fordham University. She has a wide record of publications with 10 authored books and more than 50 essays in major national and international academic journals. I will just quote a selection. Il romanzo storico in Italia, the book that I was mentioning before, Il dibattito critico dalle origini al postmoderno, published in 1999. Monographs on the 2 major Sicilian writers at the turn of the century, Pirandello Romanzieri of 2001 and L'Europa in Sicilia, Saggi su Federico de Roberto of 2005, Italian America, Epos and Storytelling in Ellen Barolini of 2015, and more recently, Ritagli critici sulla letteratura italiana contemporanea that just came out last year in 2023. She co-edited the volumes Italian Diaspora Studies, a monographic issue of the journal Moderna, and Celebrating Calabria, Writing, Heritage, and Memory. And I could go on, but time is pressing and you're here to listen to Professor Ganeri. But the titles already suggest some of the themes that she will develop here and over the next few weeks. Memory, the Italian South, the experience of diaspora and displacement, storytelling as a means to come to terms with that displacement, and much more. So the title of our talk today, Memory, Trauma, and Sicily, The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. Please join me in welcoming Professor Margherita Ganeri.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Luca, for this wonderful presentation. It's a pleasure and a great honor for me to be here as a Goggio visiting professor at the University of Toronto. I want to take the occasion of thanking all the colleagues of the Italian department for the very warm welcome that they reserved to me. And also, I'm particularly happy to have met quite a few Calabresi here, both within the department and outside. So I feel really at home. It's been wonderful. So thank you very much. I have to sit down because I have to work on my PowerPoint, so otherwise I couldn't do it standing up. As Luca anticipated, I will deliver 3 lectures that are different in themes but interconnected. The first one is dedicated, as you can see in the slide in my back, to the very well-known novel The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. Therefore, this is dedicated to an Italian writers. The following two will be dedicated to Italian diasporic writers. And I've selected one from the Italian-American literature, Helen Barolini, and the second one from Italian-Canadian literature, Penny Petrone. I'm saying that because these lectures are part of a project, a research project I have been carrying on for quite a few years already now. So I want to explain what's the connection. So I try to find connections between Italian writers and Italian diasporic writers. So what I do, I work on the idea of transnationalism, Italian transnational literature, where the Italian diasporic literature could be included as a component of the Italian transnational literary contemporary canon. So the general title of the three lectures will be connected with the first two words of the title of the lectures I'm proposing today. So memory, trauma, and South of Italy. In the case of the Leopard, the South of Italy, of course, is Sicily. I can anticipate, and in the case of the two women writers I've selected for the other two lectures, that the region will be Calabria, because they talk about Calabria. So my point, before even going into the topic, I want to say that there is a ground, a transnational ground for contemporary Italian literature that is based on the centrality of trauma. Trauma is connected with memory. Writing is a result of this memory and trauma, and they both are connected with the issue, the very complex issue of the south of Italy. Not all the text, the most important text of the Italian contemporary literature can be defined transnational, can be put in this frame where the Italian diasporic and the Italian national writers are connected. But in my point of view, The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa is one of the best novels that works in this direction. No, it's not working, sorry. Before starting, though, I would like to acknowledge the land of Canada. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat and so on, and I am grateful to have the opportunity to be a guest and to work today on this land. So The Leopard by Tomasi di Lampedusa is one of the most established novels. As soon as it was published, everybody knows that it was published 1 year after the death of the writer, after having been refused for publication by Vittorini. So it came out in 1958, and it became right away, in a very short time, a very popular novel, translated practically in every language. And here you have some covers of the translation. And it became a bestseller, and actually is considered the first bestseller of the Italian literary market. It won the year after, in 1959, won the Premio Strega, and of course, it was also published around. Its success was reinforced by the production of the masterpiece by Luchino Visconti in 2063. But my point is today that while The Leopard has been recognized as a central novel of the Italian literary canon of the second part of the 20th century, is still today underestimated within the specific area of the academic debate. So on one hand, The Leopard is very well known, very recognized, and it is part of the literary canon. On the other hand, there are many important hegemonic academic critics that still today, especially in Italy, think that the Gattopardo is mostly an expression of popular culture. It's not really a masterpiece. It shouldn't be evaluated in this as a masterpiece. But the vitality of the novel, the importance of the novel, is still very strong today in literature. And one way to recognize the vitality of a novel, one tool that we can use to recognize the vitality of the novel is the rewritings, the number of rewritings, the numbers of books that are inspired by that novel. And in this slide, I put just some example, a few examples, 3 examples. Of course, Il sorriso dell'ignoto marinaio by Vincenzo Consolo and La ragazza di Marsiglia by Maria Attanasio. In both cases, for Consolo and much later for Maria Attanasio, the Leopard is a model that they try to subvert it. But that still proved the influence of the novel, especially Vincenzo Consolo. His idea of literature is very opposite to the one that the Leopard, to the one of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa, and at the same time, the idea of the south of Italy, therefore the idea of Sicily is very different. For Maria Attanasio, who's an outstanding women writer, she's alive today, she's in her early 80s, is one of my favorites actually in the Italian contemporary literary scene. She presents herself as being nipotina di Sciascia. No, she thinks she is inspired by Leonardo Sciascia. She's a very committed, politically committed writer. And of course, she's a Sicilian. Most of her books are in Sicily, especially in Caltagirone, based in Sicily, because she is from Caltagirone. So she is against the conservative vision of the Leopard, both in terms of political national issues and both in terms of the specific vision of Sicily. The other novel came out very recently, 2022, by Angelica Silvana Laspina. This is a case of spin-off, and you can see the cover of the novel. It just shows it very rightly. This novel is the story of Angelica Sedara, one of the characters of the Leopard. And the author, Silvana Laspina, who's a very interesting women writer, she is currently working on another novel entitled Concetta. It's supposed to be out in a few months. But the influence of the novel is not limited to Italy. The case of Lampedusa by Stephen Price. He is a Canadian writer. He's a Canadian writer. Lampedusa is a novel. You have the cover. It's not a biography. He's based in British Columbia, the University of Victoria, and he wrote this novel that is a fantastic one. In fact, I'm giving also suggestions of reading if you're interested in the topic. It's very, very good one. Is the life of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa in his last 1 year and a half years of life, where he actually wrote The Leopard. He was already very sick. But of course, as I mentioned before, rewriting can also be traced, and even more importantly, my point of view, in an intermediate work. So the film by Luchino Visconti, of course, and there is a new series coming up soon, The Leopard, in 6 episodes on Netflix with Cream Rossi Stewart and stuff. So this is one of the photos that I took from Ray Publicity, where they put together one of the most famous scenes in the Visconti film, the dance with the prince and Angelica, together with the dance. And they shouldn't do it because you see, in my point of view at least, the scene here is much darker, it's not as attractive, but this is just. But this is to say that the influence of the Leopard is still very strong today. There are movies, there are novels that are inspired by that. And there is also a very important phenomenon to point it out. The book generated a new word, the word in Italian gattopardismo, that doesn't have a translation in English. But this, as you can easily see, this is a word of neologism that was generated by the title of Il Gattopardo, the Leopard, which is the Italian title for the novel. So in literary and journalistic language, Gattopardismo is the attitude traditionally defined as transformism of those who, having been part of the dominant or wealthy class in previous regime, adapt to a new political, social, and economic situation, pretending to be its promoter or supporter, to be able to maintain their power and the privileges of their country. This is a translation of Treccani Dictionary Online. And as you can see in the dictionary definition, the concept itself of gattopardismo came out from one very famous statement in the novel. The statement, the paradoxical statement, that everything must change for everything to remain as before, which is the most known, most widespread adaptation of a passage in the novel that can be read verbatim in a different form. We're going to see it in a minute. I pay you to pay attention to this expression, adaptation. Even the Treccani Dictionary talks about the adaptation of a sentence that is at the core of the new word, gattopardismo. So this word is a synonym with transformismo, which is a method of making a flexible centrist coalition, as you can read there. And actually, transformismo is a real political trend that was established by Agostino De Pretis in 1876. And then it was partially continued by Giolitti after. And in general, the age of transformismo, the whole political history of Italy until World War I is called the age of transformismo. But many claims that we are still today in the age of transformismo. This all to say that the gattopardismo, both word and concept, are very well present and quoted in Italian contemporary debate. This is just a couple of examples that I collected. Marco Travaglio, Sergio Rizzo. They use the word gattopardismo very often, especially in the journalist debate. And there's even Nuccio Iovene who says Gattopardo e Calabrese, which I like to quote. So, the impact, this all proves the impact of the novel on the general audience, because it's very rare. There are only a few cases. Actually, I could find only 3 cases of Italian words of the Italian language that derived from Italian literature. And the only 3 that I could find are Boccacesco, Machiavellico, and Pirandelliano, which is a very outmoded word, anyway. So together with Gattopardo is 4 words, but Gattopardo is much more used than the others. The 4 of them are negative, though, so that's interesting, negative values. But there are many more words that derived from literature, but they derive from foreign literature, like Hamletic from Hamleto, Bovary. I could do other examples. But from the Italian literature, these are the only words. So despite the great impact of the novel on the imaginary and on the culture of Italy, as I anticipated before, the academic, intellectual reception of the novel has been difficult since the beginning. As soon as the novel was published, there was a very animated debate. It was so animated that the 2 words were used to define the critics, the gattopardisti and the anti-gattopardisti, keep people in favor and people against the Gattopardo. And the majority of them were against the Gattopardo, and many of them were the so-called critic of the left, leftish critic. So Fortini, anche Moravia, Sciascia later changed ideas on the Leopard, but initially was very much against it. And that debate, of course, is limited to a couple of years after the publication of the novel. But still today, as I anticipated, even though the critical reception now is very large, the bibliography on the Leopard is large, but still today you can detect in the majority of the most important Italian scholars this sense of, okay, it is important, it's a very popular novel, but it is not a masterpiece that should be considered equals to other very important masterpieces of our Italian contemporary tradition. There is only one exception. This is a very important one, though. It's the case of Francesco Orlando. Francesco Orlando was one of the most important literary critics alive in Italy. He was one of the founders, probably still the most important founder of the so-called psychoanalytic criticism, together with Mario Lavagetto. And you can see his books on Freud, Lettura Freudiana, has been translated into English, Teoria della lettura freudiana della letteratura. Those are really pillars of the psychoanalytic criticism in Italy. Francesco Orlando was also one of the two pupils of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa had two students, private students. One of the two was Francesco Orlando, the other one was Gioacchino Lanza Tomasi, who eventually he adopted, so he became his son. And Francesco Orlando was also the first reader of the Leopard, because he typed the first chapters of the Leopard for Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. Not all of the novel, because towards the seventh part of the novel, they had a fight, let's say, so Orlando, didn't have contact with his maestro in the last months of his life, and he talks about that in this book. I put the cover in the slide, Ricordo di Lampedusa, da distanze diverse. He tells the story about that, and of course, he is very sorry for what happened. Okay, anyway. But Francesco Orlando decided to critically analyze the novel very late. L'intimità e la storia, the book that you see here, came out in 1998. So it's one of his last books before dying. And he explains that in an essay that was published within the second edition of Ricordi di Lampedusa, 2 years before L'intimità e la storia, where he says, I needed to have this 35, 40 years of time, of distance, in order to be able to become a critical reader of the novel. This book signs really a turning point, in my point of view, in the critical reception of the novel. There is a reception before L'intimità e la storia, there is a reception after. But despite of all this, there are still today scholars of the novel, even younger scholars, which is really, for me, it's a little more sad, makes it more sad, that write on the novel. And even though they write that this book is a very important book, but they clearly show that they haven't really read the book. So they recognize the importance of this book. At the same time, they keep talking about the novel, acting like the book was never written before. And I could give you examples of that. For one big one that I want to just mention is the definition of the genre of the novel. The historical novel, Francesco Orlando writes that The Leopard is an historical novel, while there are critics that published much later this book that say, no, it's not at all an historical novel. This is an outdated point of the critical debate that Orlando clearly opposed with arguments that are very difficult to refuse. The point is that many of these critics say, no, this is not a critical novel, and they don't even get into a debate with Francesco Orlando's theory. So in my point of view, this is sad, because in one hand, Francesco Orlando is recognized widely as one of the most important scholars that we had in Italy. But this book is mostly ignored by the scholars of Orlando. There was a very big conference in Pisa in 2021, a 3 days long conference. There was only one contribution, one paper on the Leopard, let's say. So this book is considered a minor book. And I think there is still the prejudice circulating that he wrote this book because he was his pupil, simply. Okay, yeah, he had a personal relationship. The fact is that the book declares clearly, many pages, that the Leopard is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece. You should consider it as such. And the aim of the critic is to prove false all the prejudices that the criticism have been circulating. So the fact that he is conservative, for Orlando is not conservative. It doesn't have this political conservative ideology. It is a masterpiece, it's a book that reveals a lot of influences that are European mostly. But anyway, I don't have time to go further into that. What I want to say, just very shortly, only one slide, is that the fascinated of his critical analysis, hermeneutics of the novel, is based on these very important points, methodology. As I said before, he is a psychoanalytic critic, mostly inspired to Freud, not only Freud, but Freud is the base of his thinking. And Freud is a very important, you know, the knowledge of the Freudian thinking was very important for Tomasi di Lampedusa also, because he was an expert of that. His wife was a famous psychoanalyst. So the fact that Orlando uses these categories that are very taken from the Freudian influence on the psychoanalytic approaches, it works very well for the novel, for the Leopard, also because the writer used to be influenced by all this. So he looks especially for holes, for scars, omissions, and textual unsaid. And he defines the book as a masterpiece. So he works on the text, the close reading. He calls it scomposizione paradigmatica, no? Paradigmatic decomposition. What he does, he cuts the book. And you know, there is an index, one of the 3 indexes of this book that is really crazy and impressive, because you can read Francesco Orlando's book by following the quotes that he reports. So it's an index with 2 columns, reports the quotes from the 2 different editions of the novel and the pages that they were quoted in his book. So reading this book for people who love the Leopard is a real experience, because you follow the critical interpretation, but at the same time, you dive deep into the layers of the text. It's like rereading the book. And Orlando does something like rewriting also the novel. And so what he does, he looks for textual latencies, but he also looks intensamente for the dissemination of childhood memory in the Leopard. And so for the first time, he introduces this concept of traumatic writing, painful sense of loss compensated by writing. So memory and trauma. So as I said, I follow this thread here, but it's Orlando anticipated that. In the very famous short story, even though it's not that short, entitled Ricordi d'infanzia, Childhood Memories, Giuseppe Tomasi remembers the very important house, let's call it the palace, the Lampedusa Palace, where he was born and he lived for 47 years of his life. Never moved from there. Until a few months before his destruction, I used to sleep in the room where I was born, 5 yards away from the spot where my mother's bed had stood when she gave me birth. And you can read the previous 2 quotes where he describes the beauty of this house. So clearly, this is a trauma. The bombing of the palace for Tomasi di Lampedusa by Allied bombs in 1943 signed a very big traumatic background. And that's the beginning of the project of the Leopard, starts there. Because from his personal traumatic experience, the bombing of the house, he goes backward through it goes backward, dive into the intergenerational trauma, because the protagonist of the Leopard resembles his great-grandfather, Bisnonno Giulio. And the entity of this trauma is so strong that it's clearly included in the novel. From the sailing, the goats reclining on gilded coaches, cast down, smiling, and inexorable as the summer sky. They thought themselves eternal, but a bomb made in Pittsburgh was to prove the contrary in 1943. This is a passage, of course, of the Leopard. So the Leopard clearly inscribes in itself this big trauma and introduces a very important topic, a very important issue that I want to connect with Sicily, that theme of the gods. As you can read in this passage, the gods thought themselves eternal, the gods that were painting in the ceiling of the house, but they were destroyed. Now, as we will see very soon in the next slide, the gods are also used, the Sicilians are defined gods. There is a metaphor, parallelism between the Sicilians and the gods. And another quote that I don't read here for time. But I have to step back 1 minute. So as I said before, the gattopardismo, the new word, was generated especially, thinking as the Treccani dictionary, remember, quote clearly, by this very famous Tancredi statement. Se vogliamo che tutto rimanga cos'è, bisogna che tutto cambi. You have the translation there. This is pronounced, this sentence is pronounced by Tancredi, not by Prince Don Fabrizio. Tancredi, he is about to leave to join the Garibaldi 1000 esercito, and he goes to say goodbye to the uncle. And because the uncle is frightened, because he thinks he's going to die, and he thinks, no, but you are a member of the noble family, you should be with the Bourbons. And he says, no, if we want things to stay the same, things will have to change. This is the sentence that generated the word. However, it's important to notice that that was a Tancredi sentence. As Francesco Orlando very clearly points out, the sense of the novel is the opposite. I mean, the sentence pronounced by Tancredi is proven wrong, explicitly wrong in several passages of the novel. So what Tancredi said is supposed to be an intelligent thing. Don Fabrizio at the beginning says, oh, maybe this boy is so intelligent, he's probably right. But then as the narration goes on, it becomes the opposite. This is one of the most quoted sentences of the novel, where you can read it there. I don't know if you can read from the back, where, of course, the Principe di Salina, Don Fabrizio knows very well that is the end of Casa Salina. We were the leopards, the lions. Those that will take after us will be little jackals, hyenas, and the whole of us, leopard, jackals, and sheep, we all go on thinking ourselves the salt of the heart. So the prince is depressed. The prince knows that that's the end. But even more clearly, when he's dying, this is the seventh part of the novel, is dying, he has a clear consciousness of all that. It was useless to try to avoid the thought. But the last of the Salinas was really he himself. This gaunt giant now dying on an hotel balcony. And again, the connection between all these and the memory The significance of the noble family lies entirely in this tradition, that is, in its vital memories, and he was the last to have any unusual memory. So the trauma of the end and the importance of memory. The tradition, the nobility, all the history of the noble class is based on memories, and now he was the only one to have this memory. He had said that the Salinas would always remain the Salina. He had been wrong. The last Salina was himself. Garibaldi, the burden can add one after all. And I put after all in red, but I don't explain it now. I'll explain in a few minutes why. So Francesco Orlando, even though I said is a genius in criticism, and he has really looked at everything almost in the novel, but nonetheless, Francesco Orlando never gave importance, let's put it like this, to the sentence pronounced by Tancredi. Never. Orlando writes, oh, this is a sentence that I don't understand why the readership gave it so much importance. The readers didn't understand that the sentence that Tancredi say it's proven wrong. So it doesn't give a lot of attention. I decided, on the contrary, to try to understand why that sentence pronounced by Tancredi impressed so much, such a large audiences. And this is proved by the word gattopardismo again. So I started by analyzing the sentence itself, which is the very fantastic translator, Alexander Colquhoun, which is very difficult for me to pronounce. Alexander Colquhoun, he didn't translate it literally, the sentence, you have it there. But literally, I put a literal translation here. If we want everything to remain as it is, everything must change. Okay, if we look at the sentence in Italian, the first part of the hypothetic period, periodo ipotetico, is se vogliamo che, if we want everything. That means there is a desire, want, expressed by we, if we want, okay? And then the second part of the sentence doesn't connect with the first one. First of all, there isn't any grammatical connection. No, even grammatically, that doesn't work. And because it doesn't work grammatically, it doesn't work logically as well. So if we want something, then no, everything, bisogna che, everything must change by itself. So this sentence is not logical, okay? It doesn't have meaning, really. If we analyze it very clearly, it doesn't have sense, okay? For the way in which this is expressed. So I'm synthesizing an article that I published. For those of you who read Italian interested, I have the quote there. But I had to do it. I don't want to do it just because I think I'm good, but because nobody else has thought about that, okay? So if I want to present this, I have to refer to my article. So I started to notice something. I'll go backward one moment. So the sentence is not logical, but there is something, a word that we find 2 times, tutto, tutto, everything, everything. So if we wanted everything stays the same, bisogna che tutto cambi, everything must change. So I started noticing that in the novel, the little word tutto appears a very impressive number of times, repeats himself, not only there is a quantity, okay, 145 times in the singular, 116 in the plural, which is a lot. If you consider that the opposite word, niente, or nulla, is below the 20 occurrences. But, moreover, the word appears in all the most crucial passages of the novel. And it remains invisible. The readers it's not meant to be noted by the readers. But as you can see, we find it also in the final title, Fine di tutto, which was translated by Colquhoun, relics, which makes sense, but it loses the sense. And You find the word tutto in the final passages very often, and this is just the example of the very famous last sentence of the novel where it appears again, where the dog Bendico, the mummified dog, is thrown out from the window by Concetta many years after the death of his father, and everything, then all found peace in living dust. So it's one of the last words mentioned. So, excuse me. So I noticed that the words repeat itself, and I suspected that whenever the word is there, especially in the first part of the novel, it has an anesthetic effect. It works like an anesthetic dispositivo, little tools that is aimed at covering the trauma initially, and then very slowly, through different steps during the novel, reaches the final point in which this all appears finally outside of the traumatic denial. There is denial, there is trauma, and then at the end there is overcoming of the trauma. And of course I understand this is a lot, but I try to be simple. Anyway, the reference for that is Ignacio Matablanco, which is a very important psychiatrist from Chile, and Orlando also is influenced by Matablanco. He talks about the concept of biologic, dividing the asymmetric mode and the symmetric mode. And the symmetric mode is based on the opposite that coexist. There's no contradiction, no negation, no time. And the sentence of Tancredi is an example of a symmetric mode, if we could turn backward. How can that be otherwise, that the whole, everything, changes while at the same time everything does not change? This is a paradox. But if we use the category of the symmetric mode, which can appear in a text where all the other sentences are asymmetric, that means logical, then we can have the key of that. And the asymmetric mode, of course, is always much more appealing to the audiences. But I'll go backward one moment. In this sentence, I put the cover of a very famous book by Freud, Jokes, the books on jokes, Il motto di spirito, the wits. Because, as I said before, the sentence by Tancredi, very popular, but never remembered as exactly as it is. Remember that even at Treccani says the adaptation. We remember that in adaptation. This is typical of the jokes in terms of the Freudian analysis. A joke for Freud is something that is halfway between consciousness and unconscious. And what characterizes the joke is the fact that you can't separate, you can't divide the content from the form. If you try to say the joke in a different form, a joke loses everything. So in this case, the formula by Tancredi, the sentence by Tancredi, works like a joke. Jokes can be also very serious. They don't have to make you laugh. So I claim that that sentence is a joke. And I'm surprised that Francesco Orlando, who's one of the most important scholars also of the theory of the jokes in Freud, because he published, there is a very long, important introduction to the publication of the jokes in this book in Italian. He didn't even, never thought about that. He just, as I said, writes this sentence of Tancredi, sopravvalutata, but doesn't have any importance. Now Sicily. Okay, it will be very difficult in a few minutes to synthesize all the different facets, aspects that Sicily is a real protagonist of the novel. Is a protagonist. Sicily is one of the characters of the novel. It reveals very different aspects, positive and negative. So I put some of the most famous quotes here in this slide. This is during that famous conversation, let's say, between the protagonista, Don Fabrizio, and Chevalier. Chevalier, who came to Donna Fugata to invite Don Fabrizio to be part of to accept an invitation as a senator in the parliament of the new Piedmont state. And Don Fabrizio declined the invitation. He says, no. One of the reasons is, in Sicily, it doesn't matter whether things are done well or done badly. The sin which we Sicilians never forgive is simply that of doing it all. We are old, Chevalier, very old. For 2,500 years, we have been a colony. We are worn out and exhausted. So that's one argument. The Sicilians, what they want is sleep. Sleep, my dear Chevalier, sleep. That is what Sicilians want. And they will always hate anyone who tries to wake them, even in order to bring them the most wonderful of gifts. But then the text continues saying, but I don't think that they're going to be very good gifts with the new government. And again, Sicilians never want to improve for the simple reasons that they think to be perfect. Their vanity is stronger than their misery. Every invasion by outsiders, whether so by origins or if Sicilians, independent of spirits, upsets their illusion of achieved perfection, risk disturbing their satisfied waiting for nothing. And nothing, nulla, is the opposite of tutto, of everything. But as I said before, it would be very difficult to summarize the different images of Sicily in the novel. There are many, and they're very contradictory images. So I picked here and there. Those are those two slides here with the quotes, just to prove what I'm saying. So the sun is the true ruler of Sicily, and this is a positive image. The sun is a positive sun. It's a ruler of Sicily. The second one, Don Fabrizio talks with Padre Pirrone, says, no, we're not blind, but we are human. And this is the famous metaphor of the seaweed bending under the pressure of water as a symbol of the adaptation of the Sicilians against the invasions, the intruders, the colonizers. And Sciascia recuperated this image of the algae in his talks. And then negative descriptions. The roads are terrible. The landscape of Sicily, very clearly, many passages is expressed as an irrational landscape, death landscape, bare as despair in this quote, for example. Then there is the pastoral Sicily, the happy, archaic pastoral Sicily, where all the invaders of the past, the Fenici, Greci, they all found the same there. But then at the same time, there is the aridity of Sicily, the delirious moment of creation. I don't want to go into all that, but it just to prove that the images of Sicily are mixed. And then the famous image of the very old lady, Centenaria, is a very old, 100 years old woman who is being dragged in a bath chair around the great exhibition in London, understanding nothing and caring about nothing, whether it's the steel factories of Sheffield and so on, and thinking of nothing by dozing off again. I mean, the best with pillows and with a pot under the bed. I don't think this is a positive vision of Sicily. What do you think? But then at the same time, the Sicilians are gods. We think we are gods. This is in English in the original. The Sicilians have a sense of superiority. The sense of superiority dazzles every Sicilian eye. We call ourselves pride, but in reality it's blindness. So to conclude, even though the debate is big, how can we interpret this very complex and contradictory image of Sicily, and how it has been interpreted in the debate? One example, very important, even though today was, Edward Said, who wrote in the the late book on late style, the Leopard is a Southern answer to the Southern question without synthesis, transcendence, or hopes. So he was against the Leopard, and he considered the Leopard as an example of this decadence of the debate on the Southern question. There is to say, the point of view of Edward Said is this novel is very conservative, right? If we want to synthesize it that. So Said is in a traditions of negative view of the representation of the South, negative judgments, excuse me, of the representation of the South in Sicily. Then Francesco Orlando, but I don't understand. Oh, okay. Francesco Orlando, as I said, he dedicated a very long chapter in his book on the idea that Sicily is not Sicily. For Orlando, the Leopard Sicily is a global Sicily, because the Leopard is a global novel. So the Sicilian tracts are extensible to any periphery. The extensibility of Sicilian tracts in the novel is what are really important for Orlando. So Sicily in reality is a hyper-periphery. And this also explains for Orlando the international big success of the novel. Orlando writes, readers from Japan don't know anything about Sicily. Why did they like it anyway? Because they can associate, extend the specific traits of Sicily as described there to any other periphery. So it's a global South. Now I propose a different category for me. That's a symmetrical Sicily. I use the word symmetrical, quoting Mate Blanco, as I said before. So in my point of view, the Sicily full of contradictions, so much that all the opposites overlap, they can be opposite and negative at the same time, is basically a projection. There is of trauma. Trauma, desire, avoiding the trauma, projection, illusion, and unconscious. And at the same time, the same that I said for the sentence by Tancredi, even some of the description of Sicily can be interpreted as jokes. They're too exaggerated. The idea that this is for sure they are not realistic descriptions. The Sicilians think to be gods. No, there is an ironic type of representation. But what is central is the aporema, a rhetorical category that based on the overlapping of the opposites. The opposites stays together, so to conclude, in my point of view, this is a trauma novel for the age of trauma. A trauma novel doesn't deny the pain, the loss, the impotence of the death, but it brings the idea that literature heals. So in my point of view, the Leopard seems to reveal a curative and aesthetic mechanism that ultimately leads to the overcoming of trauma. And this is also one of the reasons why the novel was so successful internationally. Thank you. And I'll be happy to have questions.
Yes, thank you, Margherita. Can we open up the floor for questions or comments? Since everyone is shy and being, I'll break the ice, and I'll break the ice with, I'm sorry if I start really at the margin, but you've got to, I want to know why you have Doctor Who in that next to the last slide.
To make fun a little bit.
The War Doctor. And that's really, a Whovian deep cut there. So I'm just wondering how that connects to your...
Because I'm working on it's a book project that I have. So I would like to work on this interconnection of memory threads and even la teoria del tutto. Now this is difficult to say. So I try to put some humor in there, in the slides. And yeah, don't let me tell you too much on my book projects, but anyway, several images that I put are to make you laugh. I don't know, the Berlusconi and Garibaldi shaking their hands, for example. I need to underline the paradoxical aspects of the novel, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, you know, I'm thinking, again, not to get too carried away from a particular hobby horse of mine, but I you know, this idea of everything changing and everything staying the same. I mean, the Doctor Who is, in the sense that it's sort of an embodiment of that, right? And so he's always different, but at the same time, he's always the Doctor. So I thought it was. I don't know. I just wasn't expecting Doctor Who to pop up.
Thank you.
Paolo.
So first of all, thank you. This has been wonderful. And so I have thoughts that perhaps will lead to a question, so bear with me for a second. I was really inspired by the point in which you described, you talked about Said, because I think that's a crucial, I think this is really a crucial point in understanding this novel. And part of me wants to think like how you combine your argument about this novel being successful because it's a trauma novel, the fact that I don't know whether you agree with me, but I do think that the international success of this particular story is due to the fact that Sicilians have been exoticized for quite a long time already by the time this novel comes out. And so to a certain extent it meets certain racialized expectations among sort of the international readership. And to me, you know, we were reading all of these sentences. I think Sabina is the one pronouncing all of those sentences about who Sicilians are. But by definition, he is Sicilian, but he's not looking the way Sicilians are supposed to look. He's blonde, blue-eyed, he's very, I mean, I think at some point Tomasi says, like, he's Germanic looking, right? So he is, in a way, connected to the colonizers dynastically in some way. So I'm wondering whether you can elaborate on that, and I think that, you know, I'm very curious how you connect that idea with the idea of trauma.
Thank you. I'm very happy about this question, even though, I mean, of course, the answer is complex. But I try to stay to the basic points. Okay. Yes, of course, Sicilians, Southern Italians in general, have been part of the Orientalization process. And I'm not saying that the Said formula is not good, it's not valuable, because it is. But on the other hand, the Leopard, in my point of view, puts in place ironical subversion of that simple pattern of Orientalization, of self-Orientalization. Through the paradoxicality, to the irony, it goes, it presents that, and at the same time problematize that by exaggerating it too much. This is my point. And so there is Orientalization, there is, but at the same time, there is a point of view that breaks that from within. Instead of simply saying, like Said said, this is a typical self-description of the victims of colonization, blah, blah, I think that the paradoxality of the novel, but also the grandezza, you know, the masterpiece aspect of the novel, put that in a light that it's itself, but it's also something that problematizes that. I don't know how to say it today. But then another very important thing to underline, though Fabrizio is Sicilian, yes. He's different from the other Sicilians, you're right, because of his mother. So he's tall, the other short, he's very white, he's blonde, okay. But this is something that is also important to notice in relation to the political vision, the political ideology of the novel. Because Fabrizio is not the representative of the Sicilians. Since the first pages of the novel, he is separated from the others, even from the other nobles. For example, one of the first passages of the book, he remembers the visits to the king, of the Bourbon king, and clearly he's against the monarchy, against the, not against in the sense that he wants to have the Piemontese here, but is isolated in his own class, with the Bourbons, with the other nobles in Sicily, in Palermo, the Malvica, all the other people, because he is different, exactly. Not only physically, he's also considered an eccentric, the text says, because he loved the mathematics, astronomy, the other things he was weird. So he is an isolated man. And these sentences that I quoted, yes, I quoted only parts of the book in which he talks about Sicily, because then there are, of course, other visions of that. You grasp it very well, that. But he uses this plural, noi, Siciliani, noi, which is something that since the beginning of the book he hasn't been used, because he is one against this class, even though politically, of course, he's in favor of that class. But his point of view problematized the vision of the class itself, of Sicily itself. So why should we readers, should we believe him when he talks about Sicily, we Sicilians, and even that passage that I underlined in that slide, we Sicilians and again other Sicilians. They come here, but they have they're more modern. So who are the Sicilians, and why is that he, Fabrizio, should be representing the Sicilians when he is different from the other? Then there is a third level of the answer is very interesting topic, the colony, Sicily as a colony, colonization. There is a passage in which Don Fabrizio says, talking with Chevalier, we are white as you are. We are white as the Queen of England, but nonetheless, we have been colony. I think this is, not very many people studied in particular this passage, but I think it's very interesting because, as you know, there is the large debate on whiteness of the southern people. Sicilians, Calabresi were considered black for a certain time. Of course, he is white because he's half German, but he says, we are white as you are. So in my point of view, as Orlando says, there are different layers of levels of this book. And you can't interpret some of the passages without considering this second level of ironic deformation. This is why I said, in my point of view, the symmetric thing works better, because there is a desire in place. Of course, this does not mean that the book is in favor of a revolution in which the South is all perfect. We don't have to go to the opposite argument. At the same time, there is an irony also on the debate, outdated in the 50s already, because Tomasi di Lampedusa was a very sophisticated reader. And he found that debate on Southern question outdated already. And if I can add another little details, this is also could be framed within the more general interesting topic of the relationship between the writer and the Sicilian culture and literature, or Italian even. Because Giuseppe Tomasi declared very often that he didn't like any of the Italian writers. He refused all the Italian writers, the famous case of the Viceré by De Roberto, for example. And, Orlando underlines that, how can that be? He is a Sicilian, he is in Sicily. Why does he have to write that he hates all the Italian writers? This is a denial that probably hides something else. But the problem is exactly that he said no, because that Sicily is seen as the writer was looking at it from abroad. And in fact, you see London is very much present in the novel. The image of Sissi, the Sicilian very old lady, goes to the exposition in London. Then there is the second child, Giovanni, very important. The second child, Giovanni, is called one of the big scarf of the text by Francesco Orlando, La cicatrice del testo, because it's mentioned only in 3 passages, very fast, only to say that he had gone to London. He was most loved child, the only one that resembled him when he dies, the only one that was like him, resembled him, and he left to go to London, in the heretic city London, the text says, where he worked in una fabbrica di carbone, si dice, carbon, come si dice? Carbon, coal miner, which is, it should have been more present in the novel, so this is why Orlando says it's a scarf. And it's interesting, why the only child, the one that he loved the best, the one more similar to him, goes to London and then is totally repressed from the test, is avoided. The point is that London is present as an opposite to Sicily. Those always get mirror games, inside, outside, here, there. So that's my answer, which is not a precise answer. I think it's not simply a self-orientalization. See, one sentence, I say.
Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. The two Sicilian writers, Elio Vittorini and Leonardo Sciascia, I mean, everything that you said about Sicily, why did they judge the novel simply on political terms? I mean, they were left. I mean, they were, communists or, left-wing, ideologues. Why did they miss all these deeper messages in the novel?
That you should ask them. I don't know. No, I think it was a different contest in Italy. First of all, Vittorini was the one who refuses the publication of the novel. So he read it before publication, and he said no. In that case, he refused it on the basis not simply of the conservative vision, political vision, but he wrote that the novel is outdated in terms of literary taste, because for him it was imitating 1900 models, and it wasn't the neorealistic type of writing that he would practice in those years, and of course that was, much more di moda. So they thought this is a superato, is an old model novel, and it's also conservative. This is the case of Vittorini. For Sciascia, it's very different, because Sciascia was really very mad at the beginning because exactly of what the novel says about Sicily and Sicilians. He didn't like the idea of Sicilian wanted to sleep, of Sicilian that thought to be perfect at all. He was a committed writer. But then eventually, in 10, 15 years, he wrote that he changed his idea on the novel, because right at that moment, when the moment came out, it was a different contest, and so he didn't really read it properly. And so after that, he said, no, actually, that's not true. And he admitted that he was influenced also, especially for his notion of sicilitudine, the very famous sicilitudine word that he invented, which is the habit of the Sicilians that are similar to the seafood metaphor. They have learned how to respond to this continuous invasion. Sicily is right there in the center of the Mediterranean, by adapting, but they think in their own terms. Isolare, the island mentality. So he publicly admitted that he was very much influenced by the Leopard. So he changed. Maybe there was a season for that right away, because commitment, scrittori impegnati, what I've never really understood is why Franco Fortini really attacked the novel very strongly. Because Franco Fortini said, no, he's really in favor. He wrote this nostalgia for the noble class, which is something that if you read the novel carefully, of course there is nostalgia in a sense, the buildings, but the point is that no, if you read the novel clearly, it's the trauma of the writer. It's not nostalgia for the noble age. And in fact, even Francesco Orlando, I mentioned before the question of the genre. So it's historical novel, he says, right? But Orlando also adds, it is a particular type of historical novel. It's called self-apology of the failing of the ending class. In my point of view, it's not even a self-apology, though, because the way we read in the novel, description, for example, the very famous, the ball, the dance, that Visconti film dedicates a lot of space, the description of the owners of the Pantaleoni family, terrible. The building itself, then the king. So I don't think in my point of view there is an apology of that class. Because apology means, it was great, like, no.
Is Sicily still Lampedusa?
Sicily is still Lampedusa?
Is it still Lampedusa? Is it still, are Sicilians still sleeping?
That I don't think so. They never slept, in my point of view. They never slept. I think the novel says something paradoxical. He didn't even think that. Well, he was writing, he wasn't sleeping. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. It's a comment, but maybe you can transform it into a question. I was very struck by what you said about the key sentence being a joke. So what really strikes me with that notion is the mode of enunciation would make that clear. It's very different how you are going to say it. So many things you said, ultimately they end up resting on the question of how do you enunciate the text, really. So it's a comment, but I was wondering if the issue of enunciation triggers any response.
I totally agree with you. In that case, that's the form of the enunciation.
Because if you say, you can make something like a joke.
Right.
So it's really the way.
But even if you read it, the way it's written. I was at a conference. I can tell an anecdote. I was at a conference, and I was giving a paper on the Leopard, and I read this sentence, and one of the other speakers stopped me and said, no, but it's not like that. I said, no, it is like that. No, but it was like, no, it's like that. So this is an anecdote, but it gives you it's very difficult to remember that sentence as it is because it doesn't make sense. So the form of the enunciation tell us more than the content, or at the same time, yeah. But it's easy to be fascinated by things that we don't understand. I mean, in that context. How come the readers don't remember that it finally says, I am the last of Salinas? But they remember that sentence, to the point of saying that the novel talks about the new word, transformism, gattopardism. No, the novel talks about the illusions of transformism. It's not possible. In effect, it's the opposite of the novel by Federico de Roberto, which is well known, or less well known by far, but that's really another masterpiece. But Tomasi di Lampedusa declared that he didn't like de Roberto at all. And in that novel, de Roberto really depicts the noble class in a very terrifying terms, but also very comic terms. So it's an attack to the noble class, Liuzeda and so on. But if you read deeply in the Leopard, some of the things seem being influenced by because there is a criticism of the noble class even here. The central character is different from the other. He is the elegant one, he's the educated one, but the other are not. They are like in the Viceré, they are not elegant. For example, there is a famous scene in the library in the house of Pantaleone, where they go to a ball and the prince goes there, watch the. Then he says, oh, I understand. The owner of the house maybe comes here once every year. So that very noble guy, the family, they don't read. They're not elegant. Their houses are ugly, outdated. So they're similar to some of the description of the Viceré. I don't think it's a defense of the noble class. It's a defense of the main character, yes. He was his great-grandfather. I don't know if I replied to your question, but...
Time for just one very quick question, and then we can continue the conversation downstairs with, I don't know what nibbles the broth. Paul.
Very quickly, I was struck by some of the language that you highlighted. So there's English being used, and I'm thinking here about relationship with the diaspora, and also, of course, British and American presence in Sicily in particular. So thinking about what you thought of that. And with respect to Italian and English, I'm thinking of the role of the subjunctive in the Italian, in this main sentence that we're exploring, rimanga, that gets lost in translation. So just a couple things that are floating around in my mind that I thought of.
That's very interesting, in fact. Yeah. It's lost in translation because you don't have it in, I don't know. But you have the se, the if, still.
Thank you all for coming. I don't get to see this very often, but to be continued, since next week we're
going
to continue this conversation with a different subject. So thank you,
to you.
for today's lecture. We're looking forward to next week, and please join me in thanking you.
Thank you. Thank you.